Hello everyone, and welcome to the second Game Time Rants. So today I'm going to be talking about another video game. I think that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the beginning, just because I've played a lot of video games. I also want to do movies. That's another big part of it. I just watched the No Way Home for Spider-Man, but I'm going to hold off on that for a little bit because what I'm going to do here soon is watch all of them, and I'm going to watch all the Spider-Man movies. I'm going to watch every single one of them so I know the full lore of all the things. I just want to be able to see it all. And for spoiler warning for that, just getting that out of the way so I can actually say what I'm trying to say. The third one, they have the multiverse with the three different on-screen Spider-Men. The main ones, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and the Tom Holland one. A really great movie, probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Marvel movie of all time. And there's so many different references. They really go crazy with trying to, show the audience that they care about it and that they really are trying really hard with getting all the lore pieces correct. So going back and watching all those so I can, get all the hints and really be able to experience the full picture. Because I've seen all the movies, of course, just as they've come out over the years. But it's been a long, long time since I've seen the originals because I never thought it was going to be something that I need to watch before watching the third one because it was a kind of a secret, not really well kept. People were saying that Andrew Garfield wouldn't comment on whether he was going to be, in the new one, and there was a lot of the original villains that were coming back from that, and so finally when he gets to that point in the film, okay, enough about the new Spider-Man movie. Today, I'm here to talk about Inscryption. So, Inscryption is basically a sort of a roguelike card game, or at least that's what it tries to disguise itself as, and this is, of course, talking about the game, major spoilers. If you haven't played the game or if you want to see the game, gameplay, whatever, I'm probably going to put up some gameplay here soonish because I really like the game and I've found some, crazy stuff with it because it's a card game. I love card games and there's a lot of ways to break it, infinite combos, that sort of thing. But the game starts with you basically being in this dude's cabin. It's really stylized, like sort of, it almost looks like everything's rotoscoped. It's like a weird, pixelated lens in like a 3D world. There's this specific style to it that I don't know exactly how to explain. I'll put like a picture on screen to kind of show you what I'm talking about, like a screenshot of the game. But it's kind of creepy at first. All the box art is all about the first act of the game because that's kind of what they want you to see. They want you to experience this is the game and leave, the twists that as they come later on. So you basically sit down at this table and you're given like a deck of cards, and it's very similar in a way. It draws a lot of different parts of a lot of different games. Of course, what I have experience with trading card games at the very least are Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and Magic the Gathering, the big three. And so there's a few things that remind me of that. So you have like 4 lanes to start out with to put, your creatures, animals, what have you. And certain creatures cost blood. That's like a blood sacrifice you have to give to put them down, which basically means you have to sacrifice a creature you already have on the board, which is very reminiscent of Yu-Gi-Oh! And, tribute summoning things where you have to get rid of 1, 2, 3, however many cards on your field to put down a bigger, more expensive creature. And of course, there are ways to bypass this, but it's a really cool system. I really actually enjoyed the system with it. I liked how the cards played. And I'm not going to go into full detail about the game mechanics. That would literally take me forever. I want to kind of save that for the more gameplay stuff when I actually show the insight I've had with playing the game. But it's very interesting. So you're stuck in this little cabin, and after a amount of time, it's very reminiscent of Slay the Spire. So it's if you've ever seen that, I'll also put up like a kind of a comparison where there are these little like symbols on the map and you have your little character and you start ascending the map, and there's different symbols that mean different things, and sometimes the roads converge or split or what have you, and it's kind of a choose your own path roguelike, and if you die, you become a card. So he has the dude that is playing against you. It's almost told in a sort of D&D fashion where it's you against the, quote unquote dungeon master DM that is telling the story and that assumes the different roles of the different characters that you meet along the way. And at the end, he takes a camera, takes a picture of you. You become that picture. And he builds your stats with random cards from your deck. You get to choose from 3 cards from your deck for each stat, whether it be your cost or attack health, that sort of thing, your abilities, which is really cool, and it can lead to some overpowered stuff because you might have a 0 cost that you can just put down without any sacrifices that has a really high power, really high health, and has some crazy, abilities. So that's a cool, unique feature about it that I really like. For the roguelike aspect, that's kind of the biggest part of the roguelike aspect, because really only the main first act is a true roguelike. I can't even say the rest of the game even comes close, because the whole thing, I guess you could count as a roguelike, but it's really only the beginning that you have to start over and over and over. The rest of it, there's no real death consequence. You can't really die. But over time, you explore the room. It's kind of like an escape room. There's a lot of different puzzles. Some parts of the world, you have to use certain cards in, the game for them to, happen outside somewhere in the cabin. And eventually, what happens is you manage to get a film roll, and you take a picture of the dude, and, you assume he becomes a picture. And one of the little parts of it is once you defeat him, you get the new game icon. And so when you start up the game, and it kind of assumes prior knowledge of video games, which this would be really weird for it to be one of your first video games, because it's kind of a I can't even say it's unpopular. There's a lot of people that have played this game, a lot of people that know about it, mostly because of its weird fourth wall breaky sort of gameplay and the little mechanics it has behind it. But it assumes that that when you start a game, there's the new game continue, options, exit, whatever. That's kind of like the main menu, and it only allows you to continue, which in some games that makes sense, where you can't start a new game because you don't have a new game to start. It depends on which way you look at it. Either you shouldn't be able to continue because you haven't left off anywhere, so you can only start a new game, or you can only continue and you can't create a new save file because you haven't played the game yet. So you can spin it the way you want to, but usually it's looked at as I should be able to start a new game. Where am I starting off from? And so in a way, you're kind of starting off through the game, but the part that you play, even if you go to a new save file, you never go to again. So it's not really starting a new game. It's just, context-wise throughout the story is. But once you get that new save slot, you get teleported to this. It's sort of like a, I can't say top-down, but the graphical style of Zelda, like that sort of where it's not quite overhead and not quite sideways. You kind of have an angled view of it, like Link to the Past sort of style, where there are 4 different people instead of the one dude that was, DMing you. You have 4 people that are these card masters that all, create cards with either a quill, a magic paintbrush, or a giant tube to create robots. And you find out that there's actually a whole bunch more mechanics. So the one dude, the beast guy, that is actually the beginning of the game, happens to be one part of the mechanic. And so there's 3 other types of mechanics in the game. And this is where I saw at the beginning of the game a good portion of the roguelike aspect. And the thing for me, what really drew me to it is, for one, I love card games. Card games are just one of my favorite things to play. I absolutely love playing them. It's something about where it's almost like a board game where you have these certain rules, and you're playing with physical things, which is not really prevalent in modern culture. It's all video games. You're playing a game most of the time, or it's a board game. One of the two. Even a D&D is sort of a board game. It's a tabletop RPG, which is kind of adjacent, but it's kind of a similar style. And with trading card games, it's basically playing a board game, except you get to, at least the way I like to explain it, is you get to play with the pieces you choose. And of course, there's ups and downs towards that. Being able to customize your own game rules is really fun to me. So I really like the card games. I really love all the aspects of what card games are. And I love roguelikes as well. That was the other draw to me, is I like roguelikes because they're really easily consumed because you might go 1-2 runs. And for those who don't know what a roguelike is, I've said it a lot of times, I should have explained this at the beginning, but it's basically where 90% of the time it has to do with some sort of dungeon where you try to descend the dungeon, and if you die permanently, and you have to start a new run down the dungeon. It's not like you're ascending one path, and if you die, you have save slots along the way. It's one long run, quote unquote. So, but as you go and keep dying over and over and having to restart, you start to accumulate some things that stay with you throughout the runs, and you start upgrading your stuff and giving yourself a better start and learning more about the game's mechanics as you go down until you manage to, get to an ending. And even after that, usually you can keep going, which I really like because, you can sit down for, 2 to, whatever amount of time. Usually, depending on the game, it might take like 10 minutes to complete a run, depending on how far you get, and, yada, yada, yada. But it's really easy to sit down and consume it for any amount of time. If I only have a few minutes, but I want to play a video game, kind of scratch that itch, I have this at my disposal. I have this game, this game, and once the run's done, it's done, or I can really just get rid of the run and I'm not losing any progress, really. So that was kind of like my main enticement for the game, and I really liked the layout of it, and I liked the sort of feel and like the almost horror-esque genre that you're going through, and like this feeling that the man you're sitting across from that you don't get to see until the very end is some kind of weirdo, and you're not able to deal or comprehend the aspects of the game, and you're kind of in the dark a lot of time. Like literally, it's kind of a philosophical and literal sort of meaning for the game, which I think is definitely what they intended. And I have to say I'm overall a little disappointed in the game, just because I wish there was more of that aspect, because after seeing I hadn't seen the whole game completed, and so I had to do some of it myself for what you needed to get past the initial roguelike aspect, and I didn't know what was after that. I didn't know how it continued, what the next acts were, but once you defeat that, you get into like this weird next one where you're like a little pixel character. It's no longer 3D, you're not wandering an environment, and you're fighting all 4 of these different people and building your own deck with new sets of rules, where there's the magic one is pretty much one of the base rules of magic, where you have these like runes which act as lands, and once you have this rune, you can play creatures of that rune type. So it's a very similar sort of deal, which is of course what they drew off of. You have the robot one, which is all about energy. So each turn you get an energy. So let's say on your first turn you have 1 energy, and so you can cast stuff that's 1 energy, or play stuff, whatever. And second turn you have 2, and then 3, and then as much as you keep over the turns. You get 1 each new turn. So if you didn't spend any, you would slowly get it, and there's some that give you extra, certain things like that. And then the last one is not really all of its own. Like the other 2 were completely new mechanics, and they even have like others for the robot ones, but it was all based on bones, which you get when a creature dies, which is actually in the original, but because there's 4, they've kind of dumbed down the cards a lot, so not all of them do everything. They've kind of been simplified a little bit because there's so many more, so it's not really simplification. It's a little bit more complicated because you have more to work with, but 90% of the time, like, I kind of feel like the magic one and the robot one are pretty useless. The only reason you would use them is in the beginning, because they draw off of different, sources. So, you can play, if you only have a few energy cards, then you can play them without having to worry about, you're drawing from one of your resource pools. So when you have multiple, it's used to draw from, all of them at once, than having to keep using all your cards with this one pool. But that's kind of where the infinite combo came in, where with the skeleton, bone stuff, whenever a creature dies, you get some, but you can make it so you can generate new guys whenever you get bones, and they die for double the bones. So you can just infinitely get characters, and then you can use those bones to power up guys or do certain things. So there's a lot of ways to get infinite stuff, and I like in the first part of the game, there's a lot of aspects that seem way more, I guess, cruel, which really fits especially the first roguelike piece of it, where if you can see what your opponent is about to put on the board before it goes down, which is really nice because you can plan against that. But if you do damage to a creature and it does enough damage, it goes over that creature. So let's say this creature's 3 health, I'm dealing it 4 damage. That 1 damage would carry over to the one behind it. So in certain situations, the card they're about to play, you can also go at the same time. And if you do overkill damage, because it's, and that's another aspect I'm actually going to explain before that, is there's like a scale. So instead of having a base amount of life that you're trying to take down, it's a scale that swings back and forth. So if you get dealt 4 damage, the scale tips this way, but if you don't, you deal him 6 damage, it goes back this way. So it's not that you're trying to get to a certain number of, hits. It's just trying to get more hits than your opponent can. So it's swinging back and forth, which I think is a really awesome and unique mechanic, at least compared to what I've experienced. And with that, if you do overkill damage, so let's say, he has like 1 hit point left and do 3, those 2 extra pieces or 2 extra points of damage you dealt can be used later on for different things. Like in the first version, you can use it to trade in pelts, which later you can get new cards, and there's a very similar thing where you get foils, which I don't know exactly what that means, but in the second version, when you get overkill damage, you can buy, a booster pack, which is kind of cool, where you get random amount of cards, or, the shop just has set cards that you can rotate through to grab as well, which is really nice, being able to kind of build your own deck that way. And it has an auto build feature, which I'm really thankful for, especially, going through my first run when I don't really have an efficiency about anything, because there's so many different cards, so many new mechanics that I haven't dealt with, that I'm like, I don't really want to deal with this. So being able to auto build, and there's sometimes I had to build myself, because each of the bosses in any part of the game have their own rules, where they have 2 health bars, so you have to kill them twice, and 3 times in some cases, and then they switch up the rules throughout it, so you have to kind of be on your toes a little bit more. But it was never overly hard. There's no difficulty setting, but you can make it harder or easier on yourself depending on what deck you get, or what cards you're able to pull, that kind of thing. But after you get through that second phase, you're supposed to try to take over one of these 4 people, and no matter what, the robot guy comes out, and he corrupts the game. You have to restart it, and you go into the third phase, which is very much like the first phase, except it's all futuristic robot guy. So you're down and you have your board. Instead of a normal map, it's quadridirectional, where you can pick 4 different directions to go in, and you're basically wandering a world. And if you die, you just lose all the money you have on you. And that was another thing. The overkill damage in this version of the game, the third act, is the coins, which is a currency that allows you to get upgrades for cards. And that's another awesome thing, is being able to give your cards new abilities, create your own cards in some instances towards the end. I did like that. I think the weakest part of the game is probably the second phase, just because it's throwing so much at you, and it's just really the conduit aspect, which isn't something I really talked about, but it's really just, if you have 2 pieces with conduits, then they create a charge or whatever, and then that does turn effects to whatever. It wasn't really that strong at all, and all the magic stuff was really crappy. There was like no point to it, just wasn't a really strong element, and it was really unbalanced. It was like, use bones, maybe some energy, especially in the third phase, because everything's based on the robot, because that's what his stuff is. Of course, there are some, didn't mean to bump the mic. There are some aspects that carry over, like later on you do deal with magic stuff, but it's more of a after effect, where like if your creature has this symbol, they get a buff, rather than to play this card you have to have this symbol. So it's just an extra thing rather than something that's a core mechanic. And even though they have conduits in that version of the game, they're also not very essential. So you can kind of play what you want. So just the normal energy aspect I like, because then you're slowly ramping up each turn, getting more stuff, and playing better and better cards. And in that version, at least, it may be in the first version, but depending on what turn you're on, you get that much energy. Which maybe for the first one, I don't know specifically. I may have completely said that wrong, but like first turn you get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can ramp it up to where, like, if you play this card, it gives you an extra energy, so you get 1 like a turn faster. So you can play the game faster. And I think that's probably my second favorite. I like the first one a lot more, just because the roguelike aspect, and I like the sacrificial thing, because you're allowed to lead to a lot more fun and unique gameplay that was really more creative on my part, the player's part. But I have to say that the fourth one was really fun as well. But there's no like death. Once you die, you just lose all your currency, and that's literally, you can go back and get it though. So wherever you died, you might have to face people again or whatever, get into encounters, but there's no real death penalty. But I think that was really fun, and the bosses there are also unique. Some of them, like one of them, Golly, I believe it's called. actually connects to the internet and gives players cards, and you can receive cards over the internet, people playing the game, and you can actually play with their cards. So giving that sort of fourth wall breaking mechanic is really fun. I really enjoy that, and I like to see when games implement it, because usually it's really hard to. And another one of the bosses actually takes into account your game files. So it's like, you look at all your files on your computer, and you want to pick the biggest one, because the bigger the file is, the more damage it does. So you place the weight on the scale, which is like the byte amount, like gigabyte. If it's like gigabytes, it's worth a lot, and that kind of thing. And then you can turn your cards into a playable character, like a little dude you can put on the battlefield. But what the game tells you is that if it dies, it gets deleted, which I thought, there's no way they do that. So I never actually played the card. I just wanted a different way without putting that down. But what it actually does is it just adds a text file to where that document is located that just has the text deleted. So it doesn't actually do it. It's just kind of a flavor thing, which is fine. I think that's the best way to go about it, because you don't actually delete someone's files, especially if they didn't know, and that somehow gets deleted. That could actually, do something really bad to their computer. And that's just kind of a little too high stakes, like messing with the actual computer itself. It's almost like close to a virus. But I like the third phase a lot. And then after that, that's kind of it. There's like a finale, and you technically get to face every one of the four guys again, as everything starts to get deleted. And another thing to mention is during the whole time, there's like this dude Luke, who is like a clone of like a card opening YouTuber. I think he's literally called like the Lucky Carter, because his name is Luke Carter. And it's kind of a cool thing to see, because it is very reminiscent of actual things where he's opening a pack, trying to get, a good card and talking to the camera, whatever. But then he gets like a video game, the Inscryption video game on a floppy disk that he starts playing. It starts messing with his life. And the people who created the game, the card game, see that there's like a video game version. They like come and kill him. And there's like this weird, like almost like sort of deep web thing going on. They don't really touch on that side. I just mean in terms of like hidden in the shadows, like secret society sort of thing that isn't really being explained, which kind of fell short for me. I felt like you almost didn't need that aspect of the game. Like, it was probably the weakest part of it. Like, I don't care what this guy's talking about, because like the found footage thing has been done so much, which is what you actually look through his, you can look through his camera, quote unquote, of all of his like video files. Some of them are corrupted, whatever, but it's like that part of the horror aspect I don't really care about. It's just kind of weak and overdone. Like, that's just an oversaturated market, even though, nothing big since, Paranormal Activity has really been around. That's it, like that horror theme that really was impactful. It's still something that I don't think is going to come around for a very long time, if, ever. It's kind of been done. There's not a lot more to do with it. I feel like it isn't really a part of it that matters too much. I do have to say as well, it's, I think, like $15-20 for the game, which for being a indie game, well, sort of indie game, Devolver, they do a lot of different things. That's the company that created it. But it's not too bad. Like, I think the game itself, if you know what you're doing and you've played card games before and you understand the mechanics, it only took me like 5 to 8 hours. And that's not all that much. And of course, you can replay the game over and over again to try to find the different things. And there's a hidden boss even. And of course, secrets around every corner. But it isn't super long. So take it with a grain of salt. If you buy that game, you're paying $20 for like a 5 to 8 hour experience. Maybe 10 if it takes you longer, depending on your luck as well. But it's just, that's something to be aware of, and something I wasn't aware of, which I'm still glad. I'm still glad I purchased the game, because it was really fun seeing that part of it. And it's kind of hard, especially now I've explained it, a lot of it is seeing it for yourself. So like I said at the beginning of the video, to go and play it for yourself, because it is one of those games you kind of want to go for, because once it's spoiled. That's kind of the big part of the game, is the twist, where you don't know that it's actually not as it appears to be with all the art and everything. I would say that the twist, I can't closely relate it to Doki Doki Literature Club, but I would say that this game is pretty heavily influenced by it, just with the fourth wall breaking and everything not appearing as it seems. Just that sort of accent, it gives me that feel at times. But overall, I think the game itself is pretty fun, and actually allowing people to sort of break it with the infinite combos is a nice touch. I think that you should allow your players to do that if they're smart enough to do that. Reward them for figuring that out for themselves. Like, there's one card that's called Ouroboros, which whenever it dies, it comes back to your hand if it was on the battlefield, and it gains 1 health and 1 attack. And so there are ways, most of the infinite combos revolve around the Ouroboros, because you are able to, there's a lot of ways to kill it, bring it to your hand, kill it, and infinitely keep doing that over and over and over again until you have, a very, very large card. Because usually, like, even like a 3/3 in the game with 3 attack, 3 defense, or 3 health is very much on the middle ground big scale. Like, I think the biggest card that I actually saw in the game was called an Urayuli, which is a 7/7. I think that's like the biggest you really get, and that's like a legendary card or whatever, or I think a rare. Yeah, that's what it is. But it's a bigger card. It's one of the biggest in the game, naturally, without breaking the game and making your own. So having 100 attack and 100 defense is a lot. So it's cool to be able to do that. That's what I really liked about it. And so I'll go over a lot more insight on the game itself when I review it. Kind of gameplay wise, and kind of go through it. I want to do like kind of a mini playthrough that kind of, I guess, more of a walkthrough, because I myself am not playing through it for the first time. You're not getting a lot of those reactions. I mean, there's a lot of things I'm going to be able to talk about there, because it's just a lot more visual stuff. This is more of a sort of podcast type thing. There is a visual element, but for the people that just want to listen to it as a podcast, you can do so. That's what I want it to really be. But I have to say, if I were to put this game on a scale of like a 1 to 10, originally I think I put Control at a 7. I would have to put, I think, Inscryption about a 6. No, 7 or an 8, I think, for Inscryption, maybe 7.5, because Control felt like it didn't live up to its potential. There was a lot of missed opportunities, but there was still a lot of good parts about the gameplay, and I still enjoyed it. But there was something about Inscryption that was just, at least, it might be a little more biased for me as well. If you're someone that likes the roguelike or the card game, you're going to like this a lot more. Just between the two games for myself, I do. And if that is a bias, that's what it's for. This is my channel. Biases are going to be biases. So I'm not super, carrying on that, but I do think this game, if you, want to try something new, try something a little different, this is definitely a cool one to try, even if you're not very good at card games or just getting into some of them. If you just like the idea of a, card game based horror almost type of game, like, it's really hard to put this into a genre. Definitely strategy. If you like strategy in general, I think this is a good game to just pick up. It's not very expensive. There might even still be a sale going on right now, but yeah, I would say as of right now, 7.5 out of 10 for, Inscryption. I think it was a relatively good game, though I think my biggest gripe is the strongest point of the game that was marketed everywhere didn't get enough of the limelight. There could have been a lot more done with it, and I think it could have had a way better outcome and feel rather than everything's breaking. It felt kind of generic, and that's kind of what really takes it away from the game. Is it still felt like it was a little bit in development. Like there was a lot of fun parts about it, and you could tell that there was polish, but at the same time, it felt like there could have been more done with it. So I'm gonna leave it here. That's kind of the final conclusion I've drawn for myself. Is I really liked the game, but it had a lot more potential. I think it gave itself, and there were certain aspects that were stronger than others that weren't touched upon enough. But I'm going to leave it like that, and I do hope you have enjoyed, and hope you look forward to more of these. I'm trying to put more out. Just hit a big landmark not too long ago at the 200 subscriber mark that I'm still really happy about, and hope to put out a lot of more of these type of videos. Of course, I want to keep the tutorial how-tos coming, but this is more of something I want to keep going frequently. Not only is it something I enjoy more, but it's also just a lot less time on me with the editing process and get everything together. And there's just a lot more content to go through here. Not to say that the tutorial doesn't, but this is more my style. Like explaining things in video games is also a part of it. Like Terraria, I might one day do something on it as well. But this is kind of a more generalized, just my thoughts and opinions on a variety of different things. So I do hope you have enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.